In a short while, we'll call up here our colleague Matthias Schmale, the resident and humanitarian coordinator ad interim for Nigeria. He will speak to you about the situation in the northeast of the country, focusing on the impact of the humanitarian crisis caused by conflict impacting an estimated 8.4 million people, as well as the other aspects of the very difficult humanitarian situation. The Secretary General will be in Washington tomorrow, Friday, 14 October, to attend meetings at the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Around midday, he will deliver remarks at the opening meeting of the International Monetary and Financial Committee of the IMF. Later in the afternoon, he will be at the plenary meeting of the Development Committee of the World Bank, where he will also deliver remarks. During his interventions, the Secretary General will highlight urgent action needed to help developing countries in distress and advance the Sustainable Development Goals. He will also stress the need for more active support to developing countries' transition to renewable energy. And in the middle of those two meetings, he's also expected to have, he will also, before each of those interventions, he will have separate bilateral meetings with David Malpass, the president of the World Bank, and Kristalina Georgieva, the managing director of the IMF. And at some point during the day, he will also meet with John Kerry, the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. And as you will have seen in an op-ed that appeared on Bloomberg Opinion today, the Secretary General said that these annual meetings could help shift the trajectory of global warming. In particular, he said multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, are essential drivers of the sources of financing for renewable energy. He called on governments to ensure that these banks are prepared to accelerate this transition. And I think our colleague Matthias will also talk about the real impact of climate change that is going on in Nigeria. Ahead of the G20 summit that will take place next month in Bali, in Indonesia, the Secretary General has written a letter to finance ministers and heads of central banks of the G20. In the letter, he says the impacts of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the climate crisis are wreaking havoc on economies across the globe. He noted that the impact of these compounding shocks on developing countries is further worsened by an unfair global financial system that relies on short-term cost-benefit analyses and privileges the rich over the poor. The Secretary General said the G20 is at a crossroads. It can proceed with the status quo, or it can take a new course to steer the global economic recovery for all. He called on G20 finance ministers and central bank governors to make the right choice and reinforce the Sustainable Development Goal stimulus that had been proposed by the UN system, which seeks to address deteriorating conditions. It also calls for a massive increase in public sector commitments towards development, humanitarian and climate mitigation, and adaptation by just 2% of the global gross domestic product. The Secretary General added that now more than ever, the leadership of the G20 is needed to steer the world out of its deepest crisis. That letter was shared with you. Back here in the Security Council, members heard a briefing by Hans Grunberg, the Special Envoy for Yemen. He noted the parties in Yemen regrettably did not reach an agreement on the extension and expansion of the truce that he had helped put forward. This has caused new uncertainty for the country and for a heightened risk of war, Mr. Grunberg warned. He said he appreciated the position of the government of Yemen on engaging positively with his proposal and regretted that Ansar Allah had come up with additional demands that could not be met. Mr. Grunberg welcomed that the parties have shown restraint since the expiration of the truce, as we have fortunately not witnessed any major military escalation. He urged the parties to continue to exercise maximum restraint. Members of the Council also heard from Joyce Misuya, the Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, who briefed the Council members also by VTC from Hudaydah in Yemen. She described the ongoing 6-day visit to the country, saying she's seen the havoc that this conflict has brought on to civilians in Yemen. For their sake, she urged the parties to avoid any escalation of violence and engage with Mr. Grunberg. She said the humanitarian appeal has received $2 billion so far, more than half of which has been provided by a single donor, that's the United States. Despite these generous contributions, she added the appeal is still only 48% funded, with less than 3 months to go this year. Update from Ukraine. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that our partners continue to deliver aid following the attacks on the oblasts of Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, not pronouncing that correctly, and Zaporizhzhia. We and our partners are also in contact with local authorities in areas affected by attacks to identify what the priority needs are for the people. Aid operations are stepping up in newly accessible areas where the government of Ukraine has regained control. In Donetsk Oblast, UNICEF distributed school-in-a-box kits, hygiene kits, and supplies for 1,400 people. Today, UN agencies also delivered hygiene kits as well as emergency shelter, food, and health supplies to recently retaken cities of Liman, also in the Donetsk Oblast. And the UN teams there saw massive destruction in the city, widespread lack of fuel, which is now causing water shortages. We're also concerned about the impact on civilians of the continuous shelling there. Our humanitarian colleagues are also concerned about the potential impacts of reported airstrikes in multiple parts of western Ukraine, in the oblasts of Lvivska, Rivnetska, and Volinska. Turning to the Turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a joint investigation team comprising of the Peacekeeping Mission, the Human Rights Office, and Congolese National Judicial Authorities completed its mission to the provinces of Ituri to collect information and report on crimes perpetrated there against civilians by armed groups between January and August of this year. The team visited areas in Augumba, Jalasiga in the northwest Mahagi territory, and Aru, Kondoi, and Biringi in southwest Aru territory. The joint investigation team provides the Congolese judiciary with logistical, financial, and technical support to travel to areas outside of their reach. As part of its efforts to ensure the protection of civilians and promote human rights through their work, the mission documented 17 serious violations of children's rights perpetrated by the Codeco armed groups and the Zaire militia, and that includes killing, sexual violence, and mutilations of minors. Quick update from the Gambia, where our team there is assisting the government following the deaths of a number of children due to acute kidney injury in the last 2.5 months. While the cause of the outbreak is currently unknown, our team there is supporting authorities to investigate the origin and prevent further spread. WHO has deployed 10 medical experts to boost the health authorities and provide the governments with $500,000 to support its outbreak response. Also, WHO and UN Children's Fund are supporting a 5-day door-to-door campaign to increase people's awareness of the outbreak and protect children by collecting any suspicious medicine that may have contributed to the outbreak. Our friends at the UN World Food Programme today warned that the world is at risk of yet another record hunger as the global food crisis continues to drive yet more people into worsening levels of food insecurity. Ahead of World Food Day, which is marked on the 16th of October, WFP called for urgent action to address the root causes of today's crisis. WFP noted that the global food crisis is a confluence of competing crises caused by climate shocks, conflict, and economic pressures that has pushed the number of hungry people around the world from 282 million to 345 million men, women, and children in just the first few months of this year. WFP said it has scaled up food assistance targets to reach about 153 million people in 2022, which is in itself a record for the agency, and by mid-year had already delivered assistance to more than 112 million people. So far, WFP has increased assistance sixfold in Sri Lanka in response to the economic crisis, launched emergency food response in Pakistan, and expanded operations to record levels in Somalia as famine looms. More information is online. Today is the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. In his message, Secretary General says that climate disasters are hurting countries and economies like never before, and populations are being blindsided and suffering their impacts. The Secretary General calls for universal early warning coverage in the next 5 years and adds that at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt next month, he will launch an action plan to make this a reality. Tomorrow, another guest, Etienne Peterschmidt, the representative of the Food and Agriculture Organization in Somalia, will brief you virtually on the situation there. And at 1:15, there'll be a briefing by Dr. Alice Jill Edwards, the UN Special Rapporteur on torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. She'll be joined by Claude Heller, the chairperson of the Committee Against Torture, and Suzanne Jabour, the chairperson of the Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture. Speaking of torture, I'm open to your questions. Yes, please. Yes, Veronica.
Thank you. I want to ask, so today, Parliamentary Assembly of Europe said that Russia is now a state sponsor of terrorism, a terrorist regime. How it might affect Russia's positions in the UN? Can you explain?
If
anyhow.
No. You know, let me put it this way. Actions or relating to membership or anything else having to do with the Council of Europe has no impact on the work of this organization, which is based on the Charter. Okay, Maggie?
Steph, any reaction from the SG on the vote yesterday in the General Assembly?
I mean, I think the vote just reaffirms the Secretary General's own position on the annexation and the violation of international law. Ibtisam, then James.
Steph, do you have any updates on my question yesterday about the Palestinian human rights lawyer who is
no, I do not.
Hunger strike?
And I'm sorry for that.
Okay, so
sorry.
you will give me some language on that. Hopefully.
Yeah, please. And sorry, yes.
Okay, I will send you a reminder.
Please,
so my question also about Palestine. As you probably know, Palestinians went on strike against Israeli siege on Shafat camp, a refugee camp in Jerusalem, where people are not allowed to, or a large number at least, to exit and enter the camp. Any comments, any language on that, and what is Mr. Winsland doing?
Well, I mean, I think this escalation of these kinds of incidents, the deterioration of the situation, is very worrying for Mr. Wennesland and ourselves. As far as Mr. Wennesland is concerned, I know he has called and will continue to call for a reducing of tensions immediately, and is opening up the space for crucial initiatives aimed at establishing a viable political horizon.
Sorry, I have a follow-up on that. So what the Israelis are doing is basically collective punishment. They are they had this siege on this camp after the killing of an Israeli soldier. I think it was Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. Do you believe that this collective punishment is against the international law? Do you condemn it? What's your comment on that?
Look, it is clear that whatever the security needs, they need to be done in a way that is proportional. We do not want to see any increase in violence, and I think this violence that we're seeing is creating and fueling another vicious cycle of fear, of concern, and this is just another symptom of the need to change the dynamics as they are on the ground. Natalia.
Thank you, Stefan. Is there any update about UN trying to get Russian ammonia through Ukraine to the world through this pipeline, Taliati-Odessa? And there is an information from Radio Liberty that Russian diplomats are ready to prepare to reject renewal of grain export deal. Is there any comments on that?
Well, I mean, a couple of things on that. On the facilitation of trade of Russian grain and Russian fertilizer, and obviously that encompasses the issue of ammonia. Rebecca Greenspan, Martin Griffiths are going there on Sunday. They and the Secretary General have also been in very close touch with European Union officials, United Kingdom officials, U.S. officials, to help facilitate, to lift the last obstacles for the real facilitation of trade in Russian grain and and especially Russian fertilizer, which is so desperately needed in so many parts of the developing world. So we're continuing on that trajectory. On the issue of the Black Grain Initiative, which is also critical for the world, I mean, we just talked about the issue of hunger here. We've seen what I would say a rather welcoming news coming out of a meeting with Mr. Putin and Mr. Erdogan, talking about the possibility of extension of that deal past the date in November. Secretary General's been in touch just a few minutes ago with Turkish authorities. We're trying to get a bit more detail, and we'll be following up on that. Yes, sir. And then James.
So in response to the ongoing internet blackout that has been rolled out by the Iranian government in the past couple of weeks.
The what, sorry?
In response to the ongoing internet blackout
Yeah.
that has been rolled out by the government in Iran, the U.S. State Department has announced that it will start engaging in negotiations with tech companies to encourage them to actually export their services to Iran and make them available, and also ease off some of the sanctions that have been preventing the availability of tech and online services to the Iranian people. Is this a decision that the UN welcomes, and do you continue to still call on the Iranian government to make sure that people have access to information on the internet?
Our position remains that people need to have access to information, right? It is critical. I think yesterday I read out a pretty clear statement of our position and our concerns about the situation in Iran, the disproportional use of force, and the need for dialogue, especially on women's rights. That continues to be our position, and access to information is definitely part of that. James.
Yes, you just mentioned the meeting between President Putin and President Erdogan. Can you tell us what the Secretary General understands by this gas hub plan?
The gas hub, I mean, the press reports we've seen on the gas hub, that issue is most likely a bilateral issue. I was referring to some of the news that we've gotten about the agreement to extend the grain deal. I'm not aware in any shape or form that whatever this gas hub may be is part of any UN initiative.
And if I can return, I haven't asked you about this for a couple of days, to Haiti. The Security Council has moved up its meeting on Haiti. It's now going to take place on Monday. So clearly the Security Council realises, following the SG's letter, that this is an urgent issue. Has the Secretary General in recent days received any firm commitments from any member states who might send forces to Haiti?
No. The Secretary General's call was for member states to coalesce and create a program or force, I mean, whatever term you want to use, to support the Haitian authorities. To help unblock critically the fuel depot, to help alleviate the humanitarian situation, and also, I mean, obviously to help with the security situation on the ground, which is having a devastating impact on our ability to do our humanitarian work. We understand those discussions are going on quite intensively, and for the Secretary General's part, he calls on member states to continue to engage with each other and with the Haitian authorities. But it is not it would not be a deployment that the UN would be coordinating.
I understand that, but does the Secretary General understand that there are countries who are prepared to take up this role?
That much he understands.
How many countries?
I'm not going to get into that. Okay. Deji.
I have some questions in Middle East. This morning, Mr. Grunberg said that Ansarallah came up with additional demands that could not be met, which lead to the the not extending of the ceasefire. Do we have some? Can we have some more details of what are those conditions or demands?
No, I'm not going to go any further than what Mr. Grunberg told the Security Council.
But there is still a possibility that if everybody can walk
of
back
course.
and
yeah, I mean, you know,
ceasefire.
the diplomatic window is not closed. I mean, Mr. Grunberg continues to engage with all the parties, and I think we're relieved that none of them have restarted major military activities, and I'm sure the Yemeni people who've suffered so long are also relieved.
Okay, my second question is concerning the new president of Iraq. The Iraqi parliament just elected the former Minister of Water Resource, Abdul Latif Rashid, as the new president amid unrest in Iraq. So any comments from the Secretary General on that?
Yes, so we've obviously seen the fact that the president of Iraq has been elected. This is clearly a positive development towards forming a government in Iraq. Don't need to remind you, it's been a year, right, since the elections. He calls on political leaders and actors to form an inclusive government as quickly as possible. And that government will need to meet the aspirations of the Iraqi people, who I think have been very vocal in expressing those aspirations. And obviously, that was a positive development today. But we're also concerned by a rather more negative development, which is the firing of rockets towards the international zone as leaders were meeting to elect a president. I think we very strongly condemn any use of violence, and we call for restraint in the respect for Iraqis' political process. I will get to you, Abdelhamid. Yes, sir.
Dimitri Sultoyanis with Star Channel Greece, and thank you for taking the question. Now, during the press briefing on September 30th, when you were asked if the UN is concerned about the militarization of Greek islands, you said, and I quote, "Statements that can heighten tensions should be avoided." I presume that was a message sent both to Ankara and Athens. Now, given that the Turkish President Erdogan has directly threatened Greece with statements such as "we will come during the night," and many others, does the UN still stand by Article 51 of the UN Charter in regards to a country's right to self-defense? And if yes, shouldn't there be a different UN approach to those threatening as opposed to those who are threatened?
I will ask for your indulgence on, I will get some language on this, but obviously the Secretary General believes in the respect for every single article in the Charter. Ray.
Thank you. So this year, SG report on Western Sahara talks about malnutrition for Sahrawi refugees, and it says over 80%, there is over 80% cuts in food rations due to funding shortfalls, and also it says that the refugees were at risk of serious food insecurity and malnutrition. My question is, the World Food Programme has done many initiatives everywhere, but we have not seen some serious initiatives for the Sahrawi refugees. Why is that? Thank you.
Well, my understanding is that World Food Programme is present where a number of these refugees are, notably in southern Algeria, but we can try to get you a bit more details from what they're trying to do. Okay. Abdelhamid, then Maggie.
Thank you. First, I had 3 questions. William took one of my questions about Iraq, but I have 2 others. The first question, the U.S. is threatening Saudi Arabia for reducing the amount of oil production. But the one party who decided to reduce the production is OPEC. Is that a good behavior between the states when you single out one country and threaten it rather than look at the whole picture of OPEC and all members of OPEC?
Well, you know, I'm not a commentator on U.S. foreign policy. I don't know if the word threaten is the right word. I'm not going to get, I've got enough issues to worry about and comment about that I'm not going to start commenting on that.
Okay. My question about also the violence in the occupied Palestinian West Bank. When you call for, when Winston called for restraint and de-escalation, he again put the two parties on equal footing. There is one people occupied and the other side is occupying. So is there more violent form in the international relations more than occupation itself?
That's an analysis I will leave to you. I think we report, I would say, extensively on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory through various reports. Our position is clear, but that sort of analysis I will leave to journalists and commentators. Margaret.
Just a couple follow-ups. When the Secretary General's in Washington tomorrow, other than Special Envoy Kerry, any plans to meet any State Department or White House officials?
At this point, nothing there's no plans I'm aware of for the White House. As for the State Department, we will keep you posted.
Okay, and then you mentioned the SG spoke with, quote, Turkish authorities. Who might that be?
Oh, he spoke to the ambassador.
Oh, the ambassador
here.
Yeah,
the ambassador here.
Oh, okay. I thought he spoke to Ankara itself.
No.
And then on Ebola, anything? Any updates on Uganda, Ebola? Any?
No.
Okay. And Ethiopia, Tigray?
No.
No.
Okay, if we're playing word association, no. Yes, Ibtisam.
I have a follow-up on the Yemen issue and the humanitarian situation. So. Ms. Mossayed said today that there are still 17 million people in need, and it's 2 million less, etc. And she was optimistic that the issue of famine, we will get to a zero point. But the question is, my question is about the fact that she said that the fund is that you have only. You have got only $2 billion, and you still need about another $2 billion. So the question is for me, what does that mean for your aid operation for the end of the year? If you are
that means it always puts things at risk. We've seen different parts of the world where the humanitarian appeals have run dry, that WFP and other frontline humanitarian agencies have to cut back on services. The impact is real, and we have ways of trying to mitigate that through the Central Emergency Fund, but that's really a very temporary Band-Aid because the money is given to individual crises, and frankly, most of them the vast majority of them are really underfunded anyhow. Okay, Matthias, please, and